Okay, so we are into chapter 2. As I said last week, the story of Rahab is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, one of my favorite characters. Just the unlikeliness of her coming to faith in God and believing God. She looks out and sees the destruction of her whole way of life, everything she has known. I mean, imagine everything disappearing, post office, Walmart, grocery store, churches, all of it being wiped away. And the best you can hope for is to be taken prisoner and dragged away, but more likely to be killed, tortured and killed. Watch your friends and family likewise disappeared, but she is able to look out in that looming threat and really see the hand of God. I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it? Rather than fear makes us think about ourselves most of the time, and here that fear turns to a respect for God. Now, it may have to do, in her case, with living in such a low estate, being a prostitute, being a person that does not feel significant or honored, that really she has nothing to lose. Maybe she doesn't. Nevertheless, it is still just astonishing. The whole story is astonishing. And so we see today Joshua is going to send spies and they're going to visit Rahab's. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, she has her house in the wall of the city. She's not inside. They don't have to go into the city and sneak around in order to go to her house. She probably, most likely, has an external door, though I'm not sure how that would work because, of the defenses of the cities, but it's very likely she had a private door that men could come and see her without anybody in the city knowing for discretion. In addition, as we've said, Jericho sits on an east-west road. It goes from across the desert towards Mesopotamia, past Jericho, and on towards the Mediterranean Sea. And so it's likely that men traveling are able to get to her house, her apartment in the wall without going into the city. Again, discretion, ease. So the spies go to her place because they assume that they will be welcomed, at her house, whereas they are the enemies for everybody else in the city. So it's just a really interesting, kind of fascinating story. So Joshua, back in the day, back in Numbers, had been one of the 12 spies who had been sent into the land. They toured all over the promised land, the land of Canaan. Now, as he faced westward, looking into the land, looking across the Jordan they had just crossed, and he viewed the land that God had promised, across the turbulent Jordan, it was natural for him to want to send spies and secure information for a successful battle. This battle, which we know the most about the battle for Jericho of any of the battles of Joshua's conquest, but it was only the first in a long and difficult war. And all the time in this war, the Israelites were in fear because they were badly outnumbered, that there would be a coalition army, that the cities would come together and give a massive army that could destroy them. So the way government worked in the ancient world was different than what we're used to. Different fortified cities would have armies, and so they were fortified for a reason. In this case, Jericho was guarding that east-west invasion route, was kind of their purpose in being there. They also probably thrived with trade, being a trade route too. And so if you had a walled city, you would have a military garrison there to defend it. If you had a military garrison, you would have a king. Now, when these cities became really, really powerful, they began to reach out and form empires. And so it would be called a city-state, where a city would rule all the territory that it conquered around. So, for example, Babylon was a world empire at that time, one of the biggest empires in the known world. And they were just a city that was fortified, that had a garrison. When you have a garrison, you have a king. And in the ancient world, a king would be much closer to a general than what we would think of as a political ruler. They were a military general that administrated or had administrators and ruled over whatever territory they had conquered. So anyway, Jericho was a city-state, and there were many other city-states that they would have to conquer, because there was if you leave a city-state, you leave a fortified military garrison behind you, and that's bad business. So always in fear in this war that somebody would come behind and they would be caught. And that's why when they lose the battle at Ai in several chapters, they go to pieces, because they're like, we are doomed. We cannot afford to lose any of these battles. So Rahab hides the spies when they come to her. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, now Joshua, son of Nun, sent out 2 men from the acacia grove where they were camping to spy secretly in the land, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. That's where we're going to start. So they went, and they came to the house of a harlot named Rahab, and they lodged there. They stayed there. They spent the night there. Rahab is an interesting name. That is an adjective in Hebrew, Rahab. It means broad. Like if you went down a broad avenue, it would be a Rahab, a Rahab. And so, as we'll cover later when we're talking specifically about Rahab, it may be a pejorative. That means an insult, that it is a name that has been tagged to her. I don't know. Can't say that for sure, but it is an interesting thing for her to be named Broad. You know, that I guess back in the 30s and 40s they called women broads, I guess because their hips are broader than men's. I don't know exactly. I don't presume to know exactly what that means, but also the other place we see this Hebrew word is talking about a sea monster. They talk about the Leviathan, and they talk about the Rahab of Egypt. Now, we don't know exactly what they are. We know ancient people feared the water, and they feared things that were under the water. When you go swimming in the ocean, there are things that swim around you. They say, if you've been in the ocean, you have swam with the sharks. They said 96% of all shark attacks happen in 3 foot of water or less. And that is because that's where the people are. There's not many people, deeper than 3 feet. But ancient people had a great fear of water. Things are just starting at this time in human history. People are starting to travel. In fact, around the time of the conquest, there was an abrupt and radical change in the world around the Mediterranean, where finally ocean-going people had the technology to cross across the water rather than just around the coast. And they can suddenly appear with ships full of men and conquer cities. There were tons of some of the biggest cities in the world disappeared in this time from what are called seagoing people. So we're right at the beginning of ocean travel at the point this takes place. So back to the subject at hand. They think the Rahab of Egypt is a hippopotamus, which goes underwater. Hippopotamuses are, and I didn't know this, hippopotamus is a Greek word. Potamus means water, hippo means horse. So water horse is what that literally means, are considered to be some of the most aggressive animals in the world. They attack people and they attack boats, and they are considered very aggressive. And so it makes sense that ancient people would consider them a sea monster. And we know that the Israelites have a close connection and knowledge of things of Egypt. So either they are calling her big woman by calling her broad, or they're calling her sea monster or hippopotamus, most likely. And as I will point out later, that's not a good thing. Anybody would like to have a nickname like that? No, none of us will. But that's an interesting thing that is kind of lost on us, on modern people. We, like Rahab, is a person of faith in the hall of faith. So the entire city of Jericho was on alert. They knew about the camp of Israel opposite across the Jordan. They knew that they were the focus point, that it was very unlikely. They were all praying that Israel would go somewhere else to enter. Someone had detected the agents. Maybe somebody had seen them going into the city or around the city. Maybe a merchant who was traveling by became aware, found out was trading, and found out that they were sending spies. I don't know, but the city detected them, and they knew that they had gone to, or they suspected that they had gone to Rahab's house. They didn't know for sure. They quickly returned to report that to the king, and the king is very nervous because he is a military king. You do not want spies telling an invading force how many soldiers you have, how much water you have stored, how much food you have stored, etc. Verse 2, it was told the king of Jericho, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. He sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country. So that's pretty specific information he had. The king, responding quickly to this news, sent messengers who demanded of Rahab that spies be surrendered. Now this next part is interesting. In keeping with Oriental custom, the custom of this time, they respected Rahab's privacy. The privacy of even such a woman as Rahab was respected. And the king's men refrained from just kicking in the door, tearing everything up, searching for these men. So there's her covering them with flax. Then the woman took the two men. So the ordering of this is a little bit wonky, but so before the men had knocked on her door, or presumably, she took the two men and hid them, and we'll find out a little bit more about that. Of course, it is possible that they are hiding in a closet or under the bed or whatever at this point. So she said, the men, so she tells the men sent by the king, the two men, the Israelite spies, came to me, but I did not know where they were from. They were just, men come to see me. I don't ask them where they are from, what their business is in the city. That's just, and so I guess I'm not very smart on these kind of matters, but I presume there is a somewhat of a respect for the nature of her profession, that she's not necessarily going to know that men are spies or not, because she presumably entertains traveling men all the time. Men that are not from Jericho come to see her frequently. When she saw them approaching her house, she took the 2 spies and hid them beneath the stalks of flax which had been placed on her roof, flat on her roof for drying. So that's my understanding. So they have to, it takes several days for flax to dry. Now this was an interesting thing. When I went to pick up Ellie in Pennsylvania, everybody grew wheat. And I did not know this because I was born at the end of the agrarian culture here in Burke County. But you have to be very careful when you harvest wheat. You cannot harvest it right after a rain, and while it's lying on the ground drying, it ruins it for it to rain on it. Or it makes it very difficult to get it dry enough to harvest it. You only because it will mildew and waste. You want very dry conditions to harvest wheat, and flax must be very similar. And so most of the houses, I presume, had flax on the roof drying. And so she took them up there and covered them under the flax on her roof. After flax stalks were pulled up at harvest time, they were soaked in water for 3 to 4 days, 3 to 4 weeks to separate the fibers. Okay, so this is not exactly like wheat. After drying in the sun, the flax was made into linen cloth. And so I guess soaking was part of the process for flax. So there is one view. Let's see, that would be, okay, so that would be inside the city. This view, these are the men sent from the king, and they are on the inside of the wall of her apartment. She's pointing out. Isn't that what it looks like to y'all? Rather than this being on the outside, because they wouldn't have a porch out on the outside of the wall. Of course, that's just somebody's drawing thought about it. So hastening down to open her front door to the king's messengers, she freely admitted that the 2 strangers had come to her house. But how could she know their identity or mission? They were just guys that stopped at her house. So Rahab's story to the king's men, we pick up in verses 5 and 6. And it happened, as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly. So she's talking to the messengers of the king. Pursue them quickly, for you may still overtake them. In parentheses, but she had brought them up to the roof and had hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. Now, we don't need to spend a lot of time. This is an instance where she is lying to those men. At the same time, she is doing God's business. Some people are very bothered by that. Some people have a very hard time reconciling that. And I have an appreciation for people. That's a high moral absolutism. I have noted there is a lot of storytelling going on, and in the ancient world, they crafted stories for maximum effect to being heard, an audience hearing the story. And as we've seen in other stories over the years, one element that you see in storytelling is power differentials. People that are very powerful and very dangerous interacting with people that are not powerful and not dangerous. And so how can a woman and a prostitute compete with armed soldiers? Well, there's different ways, but you see it over and over when women need to do something for God, but if they do it outright, they risk being executed. Rebecca and Isaac, Jael, when Sisera comes in her tent, there's just lots of cases where the women have to think quickly in order to accomplish what is God's will. Now, I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm going to walk away from it. But before I do, I will say my controversial statement. I think if they're in the way that the stories are told and how everything is set up, if there is a big enough power differential, there is an allowance made for deceit in order to continue God's plan, be God's instrument. Now, that is wholly different, though, than being told it is okay to lie. The Bible is not saying it is okay to lie. So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm sure some people that is satisfactory, some people that is not satisfactory. And, as always, don't take my word for anything. Take it to the Lord and read, and I would be more than happy to entertain an argument from people on things if they find fault. But that is my thought on it. That part of it is the way they tell stories, and that in telling a story, the weak character is allowed a little more wiggle room on the absolute adherence to the rules. Any thoughts or questions about that? Anybody want to challenge? Okay, let's keep going then. So, pursuit to the fords. Then the men of Jericho pursued them, according to what Rahab had told them, by the road to the Jordan, to the fords, that main road, that main highway. As soon as those who pursue them had gone out, they shut the gate for the night. Got ready, put the guards up in case someone comes. Now here, this is nice. Rahab now goes up to the men who are hiding, and she gives what many call Rahab's testimony. She is telling why she has done what she has done, why she has risked her life to help these 2 strangers. In Joshua chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Now, before they lay down to sleep, presumably, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men. Now, this is familiar to us. We say, of course, we agree with everything she says. But just think for a minute. She has not been raised in church like you and I have. She has never read the Bible. She has never heard a single sermon or Bible study in her life. I'm astonished by what she says here, just by observing. I know that Yahweh has given you the land of Canaan, the promised land, the land that I grew up in. God has given it to you. Now that is, the Bible author is putting in her mouth the perspective of the Bible. The biblical authors believe that God, as the King of the universe, God as creator, has the right to give the land to anybody that he chooses to. And so if you can't get there, a lot of people can. A lot of people might say, well, The Canaanites lived there. Who is God to give it to somebody else? That's fair enough if you think that. But that is not what the Bible authors think. The Bible authors think God created the land. He is the king, like this ancient Near Eastern king would be. He is the king of the universe. He made the land. He can give it to whoever he pleases. So this is a powerful statement. This is what Rahab said, but the author is taking the opportunity to state the underlying premise of the whole book of Joshua. God owns the land, and he has the right to give it to whomever he wants to. He has given it to the Israelites. The Canaanites need to move along. I know that Yahweh has given you, the Israelites, the land of Canaan, that the terror of you has fallen on us. We are fearful. And that all the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, Hivites, Perizzites, Hittites, all those people, are faint-hearted because of you. We have lost our will. We fear the Israelites. God had already said this. Coincidentally, this is where we are on Sunday morning in Exodus 23. God told the Israelites way back in Exodus, this is before the 40 years of wandering, God, through Moses, said, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. That means run away. I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites before you. Also, in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 25, these are Moses' farewell speeches. He says, this day, speaking for God, I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under the heavens, who when they hear the report of you will tremble and be in anguish because of you. So Moses was giving these speeches, presumably, by and large, on the eastern side of the Jordan as they camped, waiting to go into the land. And so probably, whereas Exodus happened before the 40 years of wandering, Deuteronomy happens after. These speeches are given after. And then they cross in, the spies go in, and what do you know? Rahab says, we are faint-hearted because of you. Everybody's terrified. Continuing on in verse 10, Rahab, we are faint-hearted, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. Showing his power, showing the greatest army in the world, the most modern army in the world, got chewed up. God drowned them. And that was 40 years ago. And recently, what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, that is King Sihon and King Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Whenever it says utterly, it in Hebrew it would say, destroying, you destroyed them. So it says the word twice to give that utterly, that very strong. So let's look back very briefly at those two victories they had. King Sihon defeated back in Numbers 21:21, when Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your land. So they come to the Amorite land and ask permission to cross. We will not turn aside into your fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from your wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory. Because if we don't, it's going to take us a long time to go around. Now, it would be challenging to believe that a king would let an entire nation of nomadic people that have lived in the desert for 40 years pass through their territory. That just, I can understand, I can for a moment pardon King Sihon for not agreeing, because what that sounds like is they are invading and they want to get into your country and then attack. Verse 23, but Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel in the wilderness, that is the desert. They went out and they came to Jahaz and they fought against Israel. So Sihon attacked them rather than give them permission. Then Israel defeated him with the sword and took possession of his land from the Arnon to Jabbok. These are two rivers, Arnon and Jabbok. As far as Ammon, for the border of Ammon was fortified. So they turned short of the fortification there. It goes on in verse 25. So the Israelites took all the cities, and Israel dwelt in all the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon, in all its villages. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and had taken all his land from his hand as far as Arnon. So Sihon had recently come into possession of this territory by defeating the king of Moab in battle. Okay? So they defeat them and take their territory and dwell there temporarily. Going to verse 21, thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. Then Moses sent to spy out Jazer, sent men to go into Jazer and spy. And they took its village and drove out the Amorites who were there. And they turned and went up by way of Bashan. So Og, king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. So King Og of Bashan attacked the Israelites also. So all this is happening before they got to the Jordan River. So they had to cross through these territories to get to the Jordan River. Verse 34 of Numbers 21, then Yahweh said to Moses, do not fear Og, for I have delivered him into your hand with all his people and his land, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So they defeated Og, his son, and all his people, until there was no survivor left him, and they took possession of the land. So at this point, these people are tough, desert, they'd all grown up in the desert. They are hungry and thirsty, and they want good land, and they are warriors. That is, I'm talking about the Israelites. And so they defeat these armies. These armies attack them, but they defeat these armies. That creates fear. They hear about that on the west side of the Jordan in the land of Canaan, and the people of Jericho feared Israel. As soon as we heard these things, again, this is Rahab talking, we heard about Sihon, we heard about Og, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you Israelites and your great victories. For the Lord your God, that is Yahweh your God, he is the God in heaven above and on earth beneath. We say, of course, we've grown up. This is coming from a woman that knew only polytheism, only the many gods. And so it is she is saying, your God is the real God, and the gods that I have grown up with are false. I'm putting them away. That's an astonishing thing. Most people who choose the faith of their parents. Not everybody, but most people who choose the faith of their parents. And so Rahab is doing something radical in her life here. She is choosing to believe God. That is the starting point of all faith. There is no getting saved without the decision she has made right here. The things that I have valued, the things that have been the most important in my life, I'm setting them aside and I'm putting Jesus first in my heart. So she says to them in verses 12 and 13, "Now therefore, because of our fear, because I have helped you, I beg you, swear to me by Yahweh, since I have shown you kindness, since I have hid you, that you also will show kindness to my father's house." Again, I find this astonishing. This is a woman of character, I think. In spite of all the things, we can only make assumptions, but most of the time in human history, families are not thrilled when one of the daughters becomes a prostitute. Am I safe? Am I on safe ground there? Most of them are not proud. Look, Sally is a hooker. She is pulling in all kind of cash. We can't believe she has risen this high limb in her life. You just don't hear that much. And so I make a little assumption that is true. We don't know. It doesn't tell us. Again, I find it astonishing. She believes God in spite of her life. She picks God over the gods of her people. She remembers her family, her father's house. Very interesting. She should mention the father. In the ancient world, women, in order to survive, had to attach to a man. Had to be attached to a man. And so they say there are only 3 jobs for a woman in the ancient world: daughter, wife, and prostitute. In all 3 cases, you depend on men for your sustenance. In the first 2, it is appropriate the men take care of you. Men can own property. Men can participate in society. Women are an extension of the men. So in the same way, we would think it unlikely for a prostitute to attach to God. It is unlikely, it seems unlikely to me, for Rahab to remember her father. She is detached from him. She is having to get her own sustenance from strange men that come up the road. So her father has divorced himself from her, and she is remembering him and her family. I find that astonishing. Show kindness to my father's house when you invade, when you conquer our city. I believe that God's going to give you Jericho. And give me a true token of your promise, so that if somebody other than you comes in, breaks in, I can show them the token of your pledge. And spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sister, and all they have. Deliver our lives from death. So she is asking not just for spiritual salvation here. She is asking for literal salvation. Save our lives. We are destined, as polytheistic Canaanites, we are destined for destruction. Y'all have taken a vow to kill all of us. I'm asking to be saved. And we will end here today. Verse 14, so the men answered her, our lives for yours. They're making a vow to her. If none of you tell this business of ours, so if you keep our secret and we are able to escape and get back to Joshua, we owe you our lives, and we will give you your life in repayment. And it shall be, when Yahweh the Lord has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you. And again, we're going to end there. I find that to be one of the most unlikely occurrences in the whole Bible.